Hello and welcome to an episcopal odyssey, something that's been in my mind for a little while. And apologies, first of all, I suppose, to those who were expecting another edition of the Pope of Woke. Brother Stanislaus is currently in Chicago on retreat, and tomorrow will be receiving the minor orders. So there's no edition of Pope of Woke this week, but there will be next week. But of your charity, please hold Brother Stanislaus in your prayers as he takes the first steps to begin to realize a long-held vocation to the sacred ministry. But instead, a little later this evening, we're going to replay some episodes of the Pope of Woke. So if you've missed episodes, if you want to catch up, then I suggest watching those later on. But an Episcopal Odyssey. So apologies again before I continue for the lack of an episode on Monday of the domestic church. But actually, that's kind of to do with this show, because quite frankly, I came back very late or very early in the morning on Monday from Slovakia. I had a raft of things on my desk to come back to, and of course, sorting out my luggage, etc., etc. So I was quite, to be brutally frank, I was too exhausted on Monday evening to present an episode of the domestic church. So there will be an episode that will return this Monday coming without fail. I absolutely promise you. Now, so today's show. So an Episcopal Odyssey, this is something that I've had in mind in concept for a while, something that I was, and I still might, confine to the Patreon channel. But this is the first episode, as it were, a sort of first tryout of this format. And essentially, an Episcopal Odyssey refers to the title of a letter penned by Archbishop Arnold Harris Matthew, who is in many ways one of the progenitors of the old Roman movement, and ultimately from whom my apostolic succession derives. And it was the title of a letter that he sent to Archbishop Randall of Canterbury, explaining the old Roman raison d'être, the reason for our being. And so I had this thought of perhaps now and again, not perhaps as a deliberate series, but just now and again as a kind of informal format, presenting a show under that title to give viewers an idea and appreciation of, I suppose, my ministry, because people may, of course, have all sorts of assumptions about what my ministry might be and what it might entail. So in many ways, this is a kind of exercise in apologia, by way of giving it insight and explaining what it is that I do and how I do it and why I do it, etc. And I think this will be, sort of ad hoc, in the sense that, sometimes my life really is quite boring. Other times, exciting things happen, like the recent trip to Slovakia. So I will probably do these shows as and when I feel there is something that is perhaps going to be of interest to you, to viewers. So, as some of you, I hope, will know, because hopefully some of you were praying, we had last week a visit to Slovakia, there to ordain minor orders and a major order of some diaconate. And this is a first for us as old Romans to be in Slovakia. I was, of course, coincidentally there at the same time as the Holy Father, as Pope Francis. No, we didn't meet, but we were there at the same time. I was, frankly, very busy, and he was there too short a time, really, for the possibility of any kind of interaction. Not that I'm certain that if I asked for an audience, I'd have been given one, but nonetheless, there was no time for me, certainly, to make an appearance at all the various events that he was at. Suffice to say that Slovakian television, though, was very good at keeping us all up to date on what the Holy Father was doing. He seemed practically to be perpetually on television, not just for the events themselves, but for the endless newsreel coverage afterwards. But it's interesting that though we were in the same city, Bratislava, the capital of the country, and though it was quite obvious that a papal visit was happening, because along the bridges, for example, they had posted flags, one of the Holy See and one of Slovakia. So it was obvious, that there was a papal visit going on, but interestingly, he was never where I was at, and I was never where he was at. And if it hadn't been for the television, to be honest, I wouldn't really have known that he was there. In the sense that going around the city myself, there were no great crowds of people. Clearly, from the television reel, obviously some people did turn up where he was. But it's interesting that a few weeks prior to his visit, they had decreed that only those who had been vaccinated would be able to attend the papal events. And then a few weeks after that, they realized that not very many people were putting their names down to attend those events. Now, there has to be said that the take-up of vaccine in Slovakia has been very poor, largely, and this is, I think, appreciable when you understand the history of the country, largely because being a former communist state, the people are naturally wary of state-imposed or advocated interventions, particularly medical interventions. There were all sorts of horrors that went on during the communist era, and so for appreciable reasons, and particularly those who live in the rural communities, etc. Anyway, the vaccine take-up has not been very great. So then they suggested that they would have red zones at the papal events. So these would be particular pens, I suppose, fenced off places where the unvaccinated, like the great unwashed, could go. But again, nobody really took up that invitation. So they covered it on the news by saying that the red zones were for spatial distancing between the pens of the crowds at the papal events. But the truth of it is that nobody was all that interested to go. It sounds perhaps a bit churlish to say, but nonetheless it's true, and there's been an observation made by many on all sides during the pontificate of Pope Francis. He is not as popular as perhaps the secular press would otherwise like us to believe he is. That is to say, that although the secular press adore Pope Francis, clearly the faithful are not quite so enamored, perhaps for all sorts of appreciable and obvious reasons. But it's known, for example, that prior to COVID, that the new Pope was not drawing anything like the crowds to St. Peter's Square for the Wednesday Angelus, as did, say, his predecessor, Benedict XVI, who, of course, the secular press hated and slighted and nicknamed the Nazi Pope. But those who have true, I would say, Catholic hearts certainly were drawn to Pope Benedict, and certainly it would seem, and perhaps harsh for me to say, but repelled by Pope Francis. But I have to be careful, of course, because recently the Holy Father himself has decried those clerics who speak ill of him, and who should instead be open for dialogue. But I have to say, Holy Father, that if you go around calling people bad names, you can hardly expect them to approach you for dialogue. One of the sadnesses for me about the resignation of Pope Benedict was that we were just about gearing ourselves up to seek a dialogue of some kind. And I think with Pope Benedict, we might have fared better than certainly were ever likely to under Pope Francis. And with the publication of Traditionis Custodes, of course, the likelihood of anyone from tradition being given a fair hearing by the Holy Father is moot, I would say, at best. So, apologies for those who think it's bad form to traduce the Sovereign Pontiff, but we are free as devout and faithful and loyal Catholics to criticize the hierarchy. It's an unknown rule, in fact, in canon law, that the faithful have the right to even proffer correction to the hierarchy. Very few do, of course, which is a great shame. But except, I should say, incidentally, if you haven't seen it already, if you search for it on the front page of, literally, if you go to the search box on the front page of www.theoldroman.com, there is a letter that is being put together from faithful Catholics, primarily from France, but across the world, who are traditional or who have an appreciation for tradition, and not incidentally just Catholics, anyone, in fact, who recognizes the importance and the significance and the relevance of the traditional Latin liturgy, is welcome to sign an open letter to the Holy Father. So do go to www.theoldroman.com and use the search box and find the post for that letter, and then add your own signature if you would like, and if you would appreciate, or if you think it worthwhile, this perhaps vain attempt to encourage the Holy Father to rethink his motu proprio. As I keep saying, as I said only this afternoon to somebody else, ask. All you can do is ask. Ask and it will be given unto you. Who knows? Perhaps the considerable criticism that the Holy Father has faced since issuing the motu proprio, perhaps an open letter from thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of concerned Catholics may persuade him to rethink things. Certainly, he ought to rethink, I think, personally, I think his approach to traditionalists, especially those within his own structures. It's a worrying time for a great number of otherwise faithful Catholics. But that said, I think it's also a time and an opportunity for many to begin to wake up and, if you pardon the expression, to smell the coffee and realize the extent of the crisis in the church today. it is in a very bad way. For a pope to suggest, as he did only a couple of days ago this week, that tradition or that history or the past is something that should be forgotten and left behind, that's a very worrying attitude indeed, and certainly one that I would not commend. But it's interesting, I note that various commentators, pundits, hacks, etc., but particularly some revered and scholarly voices from tradition are beginning, as it were, to examine a little more closely the history, the recent history of the Church leading up to Vatican II. For it has to be said that we cannot lay, and we should not lay, everything at the door of that council. The Church was heading toward, we might say, a train wreck prior to the council. Ironically, perhaps, because he is the patron of one of the most well-known traditionalist Catholic societies, but the trouble began, the tinkering with the liturgy began with none less an auspicious figure than St. Pius X himself, who drastically reformed the Roman breviary. Very few people realize that or appreciate that today. But for those who generally think that the Piuses, as I call them, so Pius IX, Pius X, Pius XII, were the greatest thing since sliced bread for tradition, really need to review and think that over. Because, for example, if we take Pius IX, when asked about the promulgation of at Vatican I papal infallibility by a cardinal, he rebuked the cardinal by saying, "What about tradition? I am tradition." Well, no, you're not. You are the guardian of tradition, Holy Father, is perhaps what the cardinal should have replied, but don't think that he did. Likewise, Pius X, as I say, drastically reformed the Roman breviary, and tinkered, we might say, with the liturgy. Some things were perhaps positive developments, other things not so good. Positive perhaps would be the encouragement to more frequent communion by the faithful, by the laity. Certainly that, I think, overall is a positive development, except that, of course, today it has led to a situation where many people think that they have an automatic right to receive Holy Communion, despite the fact that they may not be in a state of grace. And likewise, sadly, a greater profanation of the sacrament, as so many Catholics today receive the Holy Eucharist, but according to the Pew surveys, not recognizing nor discerning the body, blood, soul, and divinity of our Lord Jesus Christ, and in doing so, actually condemning and damning themselves for eternity, if we take seriously the admonition of St. Paul about those who eat and drink, not discerning, in other words, not recognizing, not believing the body and blood of the Lord, and doing so unworthily, in other words, not in a state of grace. So often we hear these people variously who complain about being turned down or turned away from communion, as if they have an automatic right to the Eucharist. Nobody has an automatic right to the Eucharist. It is a very great honor and a very great privilege, and God, in his love and mercy, is extremely generous and gracious in his kindness towards us, in enabling us to have access to the Eucharist, and to be able to truly and fully and wholly commune with him in Christ through the sacrament of his love. But unless we are shriven first, unless we are in a state of grace, And unless we truly believe that the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ is wholly and utterly present in the Eucharist, if we fail on those two criteria, we are eating and drinking damnation to ourselves, as the apostle puts it. And that, of course, is part of the reason for the great controversy over the giving of Holy Communion to pro-abortion politicians. This, of course, came up. Somebody said to me the other day, it's no longer ex cathedra statements that we should worry about, but ex aeroplane statements. Of course, Pope Francis couldn't help himself but answer a question about the reception of Holy Communion, particularly by pro-abortion, supposedly Catholic politicians on the plane back from Slovakia, or was it Hungary? I'm not quite sure, one of the two. And betrayed there his own, it would seem, lack of comprehension concerning the august nature of the reception of Holy Communion and of the great importance of the worthiness of those who receive it. Now, unless and before somebody accuses me of it, I'm not here advocating some kind of Jansenist approach to the receipt of Holy Communion, but let us be clear that Holy Church herself, for centuries, has required that those who present themselves to receive the Holy Eucharist take care to do so, to ensure that they are properly prepared to do so, that they are properly worthy to do so, that they have made confession of certainly mortal sins and received absolution, and of course that they wholly believe what Holy Church teaches about the Eucharist. But Pope Francis, I mean, he even admitted, though he said it was a mistake, but he even admitted that he had given Holy Communion to a Jewess, to a woman of the Jewish faith. Now, he says it was by mistake, but who knows? He otherwise says that he has never been in the position or a situation where supposedly an outspoken pro-abortion advocate politician has ever presented themselves to him to receive the Holy Communion. Now, quite frankly, I take that with a pinch of salt. I am sure that during his time in Buenos Aires, that Catholic politicians advocating for abortion and same-sex weddings, etc., almost certainly presented themselves to him for communion. He being known to be, shall we say, sympathetic. And of course, there was a rumor not so long ago that President Biden, during his visit to Europe for the G7 summit, visited Rome. Now, not telling, I can't believe that a Catholic president did not have some kind of audience with the Holy Father, and certainly it would seem strange that such a personage would not attend a papal mass. Who knows? Perhaps they put a they issued some kind of ban on pictures or photos being taken, but it seems very strange to me. And certainly Biden seemed to intimate before he went that he expected and had every intention to meet the Holy Father while being abroad, and even to receive Holy Communion. At the same time, of course, remember that Gregory, Cardinal Wilson of Washington, D.C., had said that had given communion to Biden and said that he would continue to do so. And this, of course, is despite the fact that it flagrantly is against canon law. You know, those who advocate abortion, those who are complicit in any way re-abortion, and that includes the promotion of it, are automatically excommunicated. In other words, they automatically are barred from receiving the Holy Eucharist. Now, I've not heard of any dispensation having been given by the Holy See absolving President Biden. I suppose it could be that he makes a confession before he receives Holy Communion, and in that confession admits his fault, receives absolution, and therefore is perhaps momentarily in a state of grace and able to receive the Holy Eucharist. But somehow I doubt that that happens. And of course, the great shame and the great worry and the great concern about this sort of behavior is that people assume then that others can get away with it too. And then, of course, it makes a mockery of the church's law, of the church's teaching, of the church's discipline, of the church's praxis. And this is not something that should be exposed by the bishop who is supposed to be head of the church, let alone those who are supposed to be princes of the church, the cardinals. So it's a great shame indeed that all that has been going on. But nonetheless, it's endemic to the situation that the church finds herself in at this time. This, as I've spoken of before, I think in Unscripted, this topsy-turvydom, where black is white and white is black and up is down and down is up. Whereas Brother Stanislaus says, what once was is not now, and what now is always was. This is the confused thinking it would seem of the Holy Father. One has to wonder, actually, if both President Biden and Pope Francis are experiencing dementia or senility or some kind of mental health issue. Both of them do not seem, from my humble opinion, such as it is worth, do not seem to be on top of their game, really. Both of them seem to make terrible faux pas in public relations, despite the otherwise general appreciation that the secular press gives them, or should I say the woke press, the MSN press. They seem to make terrible gaffes left, right and centre, making confusing statements and leaving it for spokespersons to have to mop up the mess afterwards. Very strange and interesting times we live in, as the Chinese would say. Interesting times. So that's my fourpenneth about about that. But I did say that I would share with you some thoughts and reflections on my trip to Slovakia. So, as I said, or as I had begun to say before I diverged or digressed, yes, this was a momentous occasion for Old Romans in Slovakia, the foundation and beginning of a new apostolate to serve those who would be faithful Catholics, desirous of tradition. Interestingly, the Society of St. Pius X has no presence in the country. They have, of course, just recently acquired an historic church in Vienna, which is only 30 miles away from Bratislava. So there is the possibility there, perhaps, of traditional Catholics crossing the border for Sunday Mass and holy days although it has to be said that Austria is taking border control much more seriously than I would say Slovakia is, having experienced border control at Slovakia. I, of course, flew in on Sunday the 12th of this month to Slovakia late in the evening. Flew into Vienna. At Vienna, I had to produce all the various paperwork and before they let me into the country. And perhaps they only did so because I was transiting. I was going straight to Bratislava. But when we got to the Austro-Slovakian border, the border control soldiers were just standing at the side of the road, gassing and smoking, and waving all the cars through. So there was no cross-border check, whether for passport or for COVID status, etc. We were just waved through, as opposed to the other side, because at least for a mile or more, and dual carriageway, one direction, there were cars queued up to go from Slovakia to Austria. But the road from Austria to Bratislava was clear. So I thought that was interesting to note, despite the fact that the Slovakian Interior Ministry and basically says that the country is closed when you search to find out what you need to do to be able to get into it. On the ground, in actual practice, things are rather, shall we say, laissez-faire. So we entered Slovakia without too much problem, and almost immediately went to the hotel because we had a full schedule for the next day. Rose was greeted by mine host and taken to offer mass, and then proceed with some subconditional confirmation, and then to discuss and to go through the liturgy, and then with the as they call them here in the UK, we would call them the Master of Ceremonies. In Slovakia, they call them the ceremoniary. So we had a long meeting going through the liturgy. If you've ever attended a traditional, that is Tridentine, pontifical ordination mass, then you will be aware that these are long ceremonies. We were fortunate that they were taking place on the Feast of the Exaltation of the Holy Cross. So at least it was a feast, a great feast. So the and the orders themselves were only a couple, so they wouldn't take that long to go through. But nonetheless, still it was an area of liturgy that the ceremoniary and the ministrants, as they called in Slovakia, the servers, a liturgy, a rite that they were certainly not familiar with. So hence why several hours, it has to be said, were spent in talking and walking through virtually, as it were, the liturgy, going through all the various points. You see, there are many aspects, perhaps, that so many people would probably not even notice, let alone know about. But for those involved in the liturgy, there are all sorts of components that are extra, otherwise, to the offering of a solemn mass, especially with a bishop. Suddenly everything becomes doubly intricate and complicated. I remember the ceremoniary, or the Master of Ceremonies in Canada, on the Sunday morning after my own episcopal consecration, saying to me, just before we were processing into the Mass, he said, Excellency, there are three things you should know about bishops, because you now will be affected. He said, I suppose you were some kind of a liturgist previously. And I said, well, I had a keen interest in the liturgy, and I was quite familiar with the rubrics and everything. And he said, well, he said, all of that, Excellency, will have gone now. Oh, I said. And he said, yes, he said, there are three things I know, he said, as an experienced master of ceremonies, about bishops. He said they are thick, they are blind, and they are dirty. Thick or stupid, blind, and dirty. I said, oh, really? And he said, yes. He said, and I'm sure he said that being an experienced MC yourself, when I tell you what I'm about to tell you, you will recognize what I mean. I said, oh, okay. And then he proceeded to say, well, of course, they are blind, because you have to lead them everywhere. You have to guide them everywhere. You know, you have to give them a little shove on the elbow, face them in the right direction. You have to point at everything in the book so that they say the right thing at the right time. So obviously they are stupid. He said they are so they are blind. And then he said they are stupid because you have to point everything out. You have to do everything for them. You have to take the hat off. You have to put the hat on. You have to give them the crozier. You have to take away the crozier. You have to dress them. You have to vest them. They can't do anything for themselves. And then lastly, he said, and of course, they're dirty, because every 5 minutes you have to wash their hands. Now, anyone familiar with the traditional pontifical liturgies, I hope, would recognize and appreciate his observations, because all of that is essentially true. But I have learned, of course, in my episcopal ministry as an old Roman bishop, that I can never take for granted the knowledge and the experience of the servers that will be assisting me at any given time, because my ministry has involved traveling to far-flung places, and thus working with serving teams who are not familiar with me, and I'm not familiar with them, and who also are not very familiar with pontifical liturgies. I have to keep my wits about me. So I thank God that I did have some experience as a master of ceremonies before my consecration, and that, at least in my instance, the Holy Spirit didn't take away that knowledge and wisdom, so that I'm fairly able to keep my wits about me during the pontifical liturgies, and whisper, if I have to, any directions to the ceremoniary or to the acolytes and servers or assisting clergy around me. So on the day then, the Feast of the Exaltation of the Holy Cross, that was our first truly solemn pontifical liturgy. We had a cantor for the occasion who sung beautifully, a very experienced liturgical musician. We had the former cathedral organist of Bratislava playing the chapel organ for us. And I have to say, having seen the instrument, the chapel organ literally is a chapel organ. Indeed, it's smaller even than chapel organs I have seen in little chapels in Wales, smaller even than some of the littlest harmonium type organs I have seen in Presbyterian chapels or Congregationalist chapels in Wales and other places. It's the original instrument, so it's an 18th century pipe organ, literally 4 registers, and no stops, So the registers are operated by basically a piece of metal sticking out of a slit in the wood. So you have to flick the metal backwards and forwards to alter the registration. One tiny manual pipe organ, and literally the organist is sitting directly behind the small pipe organ case. So I'll show you in a moment a picture of it, but hopefully for your interest, let's just share with you some photos of the location, because we were very blessed for these liturgies to have the generosity of the mayor of Bratislava, who put the historic primatial palace in the center of the city at our disposal. So let me just show you a picture of the outside. So that is the historic primatial palace in the center of Bratislava. And you can see in the center of it there the central archway under the balcony, and that was designed, of course, for coaches, horse-drawn coaches to enter, and they went through into this beautiful tunnel, entrance tunnel. Of course, it's a neoclassical style palace, built between 1778 and 1781 for Archbishop Joseph, and I'm going to say Bathiani, but I've probably pronounced that wrong, and designed by the architect Melchior Hefele. This is the central courtyard, which that tunnel enters into. So, of course, here the horse-drawn coaches would have been able to turn around, going around the fountain to go back out again. And in the top left-hand corner, you can just see a doorway, and that was the entrance to the chapel. Now, note in that top right-hand corner that you have blocked out bays. So where on the other side there are windows, you see they are blocked out on the right-hand side. And when you see the inside of the chapel, you will understand why. But the chapel itself is literally directly behind those blocked out bays. But before we get to the chapel, I just want to show you some of the rest of the palace, because it really is quite a beautiful building. And of course, it contains this historic room known as the Hall of Mirrors. And in 1805, this room witnessed the signing of the fourth Peace of Pressburg, ending the War of the Third Coalition with Napoleon Bonaparte. And then onto the chapel itself. So you can just about see in the very top center, or just off center, above the high altar, you can see where the windows are open, but you can understand looking at the side walls, the side altars, where those bay windows are blocked out. So as you can see, again, obviously a neoclassical style Baroque appointed chapel. So this was the Archbishop's private chapel, and a marble high altar, and atop the tabernacle, which of course takes pride of place in the center of the altar, is a relic of the true cross. Now, of course, outside of the ceremonies, the Blessed Sacrament is not reserved, but the relic of the true cross nonetheless is there. And of course, hopefully, as you all know, a relic of the true cross is venerated in much the same way as the Blessed Sacrament. So it's customary to genuflect towards it. Now, strangely enough, a few years ago, at a priesting in London, I was offered a mass where a relic of the true cross formed the center of devotion for that high altar. So it was rather nice on the feast of the exaltation of the Holy Cross, indeed, to have the true relic there. Now, here gives you a perspective of the chapel looking to the liturgical west. As you can see, we pontificated from the full stall, from the chair. And there in the top left-hand corner of the photograph, you can see the chapel organ. Now, this photo actually was taken from the Ember Saturday, the subdiaconal ordination. But you can see, so there was a schola of 4 professional voices on that occasion, singing from the organ gallery. But you can see that that's the entirety of the organ is in that organ case. And that is the original 18th century instrument and case. And here again, so this was at the toward the beginning of the subdiaconal ordination itself. So the candidate is seen there kneeling with his votiva candle, which at the offertory he will gift to the ordaining bishop, and over his left arm is the folded tunicle, which is the proper vestment of the subdeacon that during the ordination he will be vested with. And there I am seated, center of the altar, and reading the admonition to those who are presenting themselves for ordination as subdeacons. And you can see there on the right hand side the high altar, and in the center, of course, the large book. As I had to point out to somebody on Facebook, that is not a Bible. That is the pontifical canon. You will, of course, hopefully, if you're familiar with tradition, know the phenomena of altar cards, of which there are usually 3 on the altar for a priest when he offers mass, and they act as a kind of aide-memoire, so that various prayers are printed on the altar card for the benefit of the priest to jog his memory. Well, in a pontifical mass, the pontifical canon fulfills that role for a bishop. And then you can also see above the tabernacle is the relic of the true cross. And what was rather nice is that the tabernacle door itself has a crucifix. So that was the focus of my devotion, of course, whilst offering the Mass. But above it too was the true the relic of the true cross. And this is another moment in the ordination ceremony. I think here I'm just about to vest the new subdeacon with the tunicle. Previously, or rather prior to that, you will see that the amice on his neck is perhaps not as tidy as it might be, and that's because during the rite, the ordaining bishop takes the amice and pulls it up over the back of the neck of the subdeacon, saying a prayer. And you will also notice on the altar are cruets and a paten and chalice, or a chalice and paten. These, of course, are the instruments denoting or particular to the subdiaconal order. The subdeacon is that transitory stage of the ordinand from layperson to major cleric. So at the beginning of the ceremony, when the candidates are called forward, the ordinandi take a deliberate step with their right foot and take one step forward as they say ad sum, and that deliberate step forward denotes their willingness to go from lay state to properly clerical state. In other words, those who receive minor orders are, yes, we call them clerics. They are minor clerics, we might say, but they are, technically speaking, still laity. The subdiaconate is the first rung or the first step into proper clerical status. So the subdeacon, not only by taking that step is he presenting himself by saying ad sum, he is answering the archdeacon's invitation, saying that he is present for the ordination, but he is also expressing his willingness to embrace celibacy, and also to take on, to receive the discipline and canonical obligation of reciting the divine office, the breviary. So this is the stage when those who will eventually become priests, or who may remain deacons or subdeacons, as some may permanently, from the moment of their subdiaconal ordination, they become obliged to recite the prayer of the church, which of course they do for and on behalf of the church. And oh yes, that's the homily. And again, you can see the cruets and the chalice and paten on the epistle corner of the altar. And again, you can see that blocked in bay window, as it were, that from the courtyard you can see is blocked. And then here is the administration of Holy Communion. I think, in fact, that is the subdeacon's mother receiving Holy Communion at this point. And notice the housling cloth or communion cloth being held and extended underneath the ciborium, which is in my hand, but here being held up by the acolytes, in order, of course, to contain any wayward crumbs from the Eucharist. So So some photos there of the chapel and of the ceremonies. Now, of course, there were two. So the Feast of the Exaltation of the Holy Cross, obviously the vestments then were in red, and then on the following Saturday, which was an Ember Saturday, um, the subdiaconal ordination, of course, that was in violet vestments. And yes, and it has to be said that the ceremoniary and the ministrants, the servers, bless them, did ever so well, all things considered, and so too did the cantor and the scholar, respectively. Of course, the chants for the gradual, there are of course 4 graduals on an Embertide Saturday, and these are only heard once a year, so they're not terribly well known, and it has to be said the scholar did extremely well, extremely well. I did advise them beforehand just to take their time and to focus on the notes, and the phrasing will come. So I'm glad to say that they took that on board and did very well indeed. Of course, during the subdiaconal ordination, we had the Litany of the Saints, and that's a particularly favourite moment of mine during ordinations, invoking the intercession of the saints for those who are being ordained. Now, thoughts otherwise about the state of things in Slovakia. Well, as I said before, we old Romans are making the first foundation of a traditional Catholic apostolate in Slovakia. Interestingly, during the communist era, the church was at various times permitted and not permitted, but when or immediately following the communist era, the church itself in Slovakia was liturgically quite traditional, quite conservative, but sadly over time that quickly dissipated, I suppose, as the church became more in contact and communication with the ideologies and praxis of others, Catholics in other countries. So sadly, the so-called spirit of Vatican II entered the Slovakian praxis, and everything began to go sadly awry. So that, in one respect, if you're used to bad liturgy anywhere else in the world, then you will find bad liturgy in Slovakia. Sad to say. But until now, there has been very little, it would seem, on the surface, desire for tradition. However, all of that clearly is not the case. I met during my time there both laity and clerics who clearly have a desire for and an affection for the traditional rite, and for a more traditional and dignified consideration, re the liturgy and re the devotion and praxis of the faith. I met well, just about every other person I was introduced to, it seemed to me, had been a former seminarian, and clearly part of the issues common to their experience, sadly, were were the lack of interest and reverence, and even, we might say, animosity toward the traditional liturgy and to traditional piety, and of course to traditional theology. And it has to be said, the lax moral praxis of the clergy. So that those things that are not good elsewhere are sadly also to be found, it would seem, amongst some of the clergy there too. Inappropriate behavior, attitudes, shall we say, infidelity to vows of celibacy and chastity, a lax piety, all the things that we find elsewhere, sadly, in the post-Vatican II Church, are now clearly prevalent in the Church in Slovakia. But that said, there is hope. There is hope. There is hope, if only because, at least for the citizens of Bratislava, now with the Martinin-Kirche in Vienna, there is a decent traditional mass to be able to go to and to experience. And because now, of course, there is an old Roman apostolate founded in Slovakia, Dr. Sikora, who is now the only subdeacon in the whole of Slovakia, is keen and eager to develop a ministry and apostolate for tradition in the country. So there is everything to hope for, and of course there will be, of course it won't be easy. Already, clearly our presence was known, shall we say. Various whispers came to our ears about us. So certainly people knew that we were there. Certainly they knew that the ordinations were going on or had taken place. And seemingly they also knew that we were about tradition. So I can't remember who it is that said any publicity is good publicity, including bad publicity. So as usual, we begin with all the maligning, all the insults, all the misinformation, which is common, of course, to those who hate tradition. They will espouse all sorts of nonsense about us. Do please, of your charity, pray for Dr. Sikora as he faces now the opprobrium of his some are his former colleagues. He was himself a seminarian for the Archdiocese of Bratislava, and was essentially kicked out for being a traditionalist, for caring too much about the liturgy, etc. He's also, incidentally, a trained psychologist, and I know he will be an excellent pastor to the faithful there. So do please pray for him, because it's already started. He will, of course, be slandered left, right, and centre, certainly by the powers that be, who, of course, be fearful of the presence of tradition. Their concern, of course, as usual, is their only concern is losing more people. as with everywhere else in the Novus Ordo Church, the church in Slovakia has declined in numbers considerably, and no doubt will continue to do so. But that does not, of course, mean that the church itself ultimately will demise, and especially not now that we have an old Roman presence and the continuity and constancy and fidelity of tradition in that place. So there we are. I hope that was of interest, and I hope you will pray for our new apostolate there in Slovakia. Tomorrow, of course, as I said earlier, Brother Stanislaus is receiving the minor orders, so do please hold him in your prayers, both for the rest of today and for tomorrow. I know he will be spiritually preparing himself now in retreat for the reception of those many graces tomorrow, and for that, those first steps towards the realization of his clear calling to the sacred ministry. So do hold him in your prayers too. And I don't think that Brother Stanislaus will be joining us for Unscripted, but hopefully Bishop Kelly will, and hopefully Father Tom, I believe, is intending to join us as well. So please do tune in for that tomorrow after the evening Angelus. Tomorrow's Mass, of course, that will be the next live broadcast on this channel, the traditional Latin Mass for Our Lady on Saturday. Today, of course, remember, was the Feast of Our Lady of Walsingham in England, and Our Lady of Ransom elsewhere. So, as I asked and suggested in my homily this morning, please do pray for the conversion of souls. Pray for the conversion of your loved ones, of your friends, of your colleagues, of your neighbors, of your community, of our societies, respectively, and our nations. Be as fervent as St. Monica was for the conversion of her son, St. Augustine. Ask, and it shall be given to you. Seek, and you shall find. Please do pray, especially today, but always for conversions. But today, particularly, remember to ask for Our Lady's prayers. As Our Lady of Ransom, and indeed as Our Lady of Walsingham, Our Lady, of course, has particular care and concern. She has the same love as her son Jesus for the salvation of souls, and you can be assured of fervent prayers by her, if you ask her to join yours for the conversion of those you love and those you should love. Well, bless you and thank you for your kind attention. I hope that you will join us for any or all of those upcoming broadcasts. And meanwhile, I will leave you with a blessing. In nomine Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Sit nomen Domini benedictum, ex hoc nunc usque in saecula, haudetur nos in nomine Domini, qui feci caelum et terram. Benedictio Dei omnipotentis, Patri, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti, descendet super vos, et maneat semper. Amen. God love you, and we'll see you again online soon. Take care of yourselves.